in, feel free to come in, and people in the back, direct people who show up to come in. They won't be rude to walk in. And students, if you have to get somewhere, we know you're busy. You won't be rude to get up and leave as long as you don't stomp out in a huff. My name's Russ. It wouldn't be the first time we can handle. We can take it. You can do that if you want to. My name's Russ Muirhead. I teach in the government department. And I am really delighted to have with us here, to be hosting here at Dartmouth College, the chair of the state Republican Party here in New Hampshire, Chris Ager. Welcome to Dartmouth. We're delighted to have you. We're honored to have you. And I am equally delighted and honored to have the chair of the state Democratic Party, Ray Buckley. Welcome to Dartmouth.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Rockefeller Center. And I do want to say, I think it's unprecedented, and I'm not sure that you've shared a stage with each other yet. You're kind of new to the job, that might be why. I don't think there's that many places in the country where you'll see the head of the Republican Party, the head of the Democratic Party getting together in a public forum to talk about elections and the primary. And I think that's an extraordinary reflection of something about the civic culture here in New Hampshire, but also of your characters and integrity. And so thank you, really authentically. Yep. Thank you for coming. Yeah. We are here mainly to talk about the New Hampshire primary. And both of these people have a special place and really a very, very long history with the New Hampshire primary. And so we'd like to get your wisdom, your insights, your feelings about this institution, along with your sense of how things are going to be going this winter when we have the primary. And so what I'd first like to talk about is where the primary is at right now, what it looks like it's shaping up to be in New Hampshire, and also along with that, what I'd also like to invite you to speak to is why there should be a first in the nation New Hampshire presidential primary. Imagine that we're encountering a student from some other state, just make up your state, Montana, New York, Nevada, whatever, and they're like, hey, why would we want the first primary to be in New Hampshire? That's just kind of weird. Why should it be that way? What are the reasons for that? Or what reasons might justify it? So if you have any thoughts on that too, along with your sense of where we're at right now in the upcoming primary, I'd like to invite you to share them. So this time, I'll start with the person on my immediate left, Mr. Buckley. Next time I'll start with you. We'll be fair about it. Ray, New Hampshire primary.
Thank you, Russ, for having the two of us, and of course for all of you joining us. New Hampshire primary is something that we are quite passionate about here in New Hampshire. And as to the 2024 presidential primary, I think it's going to be exciting on both sides. I think on the Republican side, obviously, the big question is anyone going to get anywhere near Donald Trump? And on the Democratic side is how well will the write-in do for Joe Biden? And so each side is going to have some drama that night, and that's how we like the primary. We like to have a little excitement in there. My argument for the primary is, first off, we're a small state, and if you're going to try to have the one-on-one conversations that is necessary to really vet a candidate, it has to be done in a place where there's time, there's space to be able to, you can get from one end of the state. Most places are within an hour and a half, 2 hours of each other, most of the population. And you can have those really in-depth conversations. Previously, I served as head of the State Parties Association, and I got to travel to all the other state parties and to go to their dinners and their events, and I would see how the people from the other states would be just so in love with these governors or members of Congress or whoever who had dreams of being president. And none of them asked a tough, difficult question. None of them in any way treated them the way we treat, where we're like, very nice to meet you. Now, what exactly is your position on blank? And it doesn't matter if you're 15 years old, like I was in 75, interviewing all of the candidates, or if you're 95 years old. Everyone in New Hampshire is part of it. It's part of our culture. And I think that New Hampshire does it well. We've done it very well. And that's why we have the law. We will continue doing so, no matter what either political party says on the national level, that we will retain our First in the Nation primary. We believe that we have done our job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Chris.
Yeah, so the New Hampshire primary is really helps filter the candidates and expose them to the rest of the country. And as the chairman said, we have the element of retail that a lot of other states don't have. In another state, if you have a lot of money or you're a celebrity, you'll rise right to the top. Here, you have to answer the difficult questions. We even have high school students who ask better questions than most of the national media. And it's what people care about, not what media institutions or party institutions care about, or the big wealthy donors. It's what the average person cares about. So it's very important. When Russ talked a little bit about other states saying, hey, why not us? We've been successful for 103 years with the First Nation primary. It's in our DNA. And he brought up Utah and New York as two examples. We don't go to Utah and say, hey, Zion is a national park. We should cut that out like they did some of the monuments in Egypt and move it to New Hampshire for a while so we can enjoy it. We don't go to New York and say, France gave the Statue of Liberty to the United States. It didn't give it to New York. But they've been a good steward of the Statue of Liberty. They've been a great steward, so let's leave it there. It belongs there. The New Hampshire primary, or the First in the Nation primary, belongs here. We've been very good stewards of the primary, and there's no reason to change it. And we'll continue to be good stewards of it into the future. There's even a move by some in the State House to enshrine it in our Constitution. And so there's no movement away from the First Nation primary, and we'll fight hard for it. We have a plan for 2028. I know our friends on the Democratic side, this is one thing that we agree on. I mean, a lot of other things, yeah, we might have a few differences here and there. Maybe everything else we have a few differences. But this, we are united on. First Nation, it's good for New Hampshire, it's good for the country. And we intend on keeping it that way and working very hard. Right now for 2028, we're already working the rules committees to keep New Hampshire first.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know that in your daily work, you're always forward-looking. You're in the there's always a campaign. There's always probably get 3,000 phone calls and emails before noon every day, and you're in the thick of it. But I would like to invite you to look back a little bit on the history of the New Hampshire primary, and share with us, any memories, any observations you have, any high points are really interesting or dramatic. You like the drama, any dramatic points that really stand out to you as you look back at the long history of the New Hampshire primary. So now I'd like to start with you, if that's okay.
Sure, and I'll kind of focus on the Republican side because that's what I care the most about. But in 1980, Ronald Reagan was at a debate in Nashua, and Mr. Breen was, the Nashua Telegraph, the moderator, and there was some dispute over who could attend the debate. Sound familiar? I mean, we're having the same kind of issues today. Who should be in the debate, and they ended up saying we're going to limit it to Bush and Reagan, and so therefore they had to have a different funding mechanism to keep it fair. So Ronald Reagan said, I'll pay for it. And when they got there, there was a little dispute, and the famous one-liner that he had when Mr. Breen tried to turn off his microphone because he wanted to make an announcement, he stood up and said, is this microphone still on? And it was, and he sat down and said, I paid for this microphone, Mr. Green. So even mispronounced his name. But that's kind of enshrined in First Nation history. And that microphone now is at the Reagan Library in California. It's owned by Bob Malloy, who still runs a communications business out of Manchester. but it's a little piece of history that happened just right in Nashua, and New Hampshire propelled Ronald Reagan on to become, the most popular president in history, by the electoral vote count in 1984, and won in 80 and 84, and just a great moment. And in 2016, we had this very unusual candidate running, and he lost in Iowa and came to New Hampshire, and Corey Lewandowski was part of his campaign management team from New Hampshire, and Fred in the front row here, he was on his team as well as a co-chair, and now 45th President Donald Trump won in New Hampshire and didn't look back after that. And people didn't know what was going to happen with Trump then. Whether you like him or don't like him, New Hampshire really was his first win and propelled him on to the presidency. And so New Hampshire plays a huge role. Those are two of my more recent favorite examples. But again, you can go back 103 years, and I think Ray might have been here for 100 of those. But we're actually the same age. I know I look a lot younger, but... the
mudslinging already begins.
He's been chair for 9 months. I've been chair for 17 years. I think, of course, he looks younger. I literally have probably 30 stories around every primary, mostly because I will read anything about either Democratic or Republican primary. But one of the stories that I tell people is, so in 1975, I was homesick one day, and Barbara Walters was on saying, hey, we've got the former governor of Georgia coming on. He's running for president. And I was like, so I grabbed a piece of paper and took notes. Of course, what else does a 15-year-old in New Hampshire do? And after that interview, I was sold, and I had expected that I was going to interview Mo Udall and Fred Harris and Sergeant Shriver and Birch Bayh and the others, but I was ready to go. So I started volunteering, and so the summer of '75, so I was between, would have been between 10th grade and 11th grade, I would, my stepfather would give me a ride into Concord every day, and so I volunteered at the state headquarters. Well, they decided that they were going to give me a project, and so in Pennacook, there was a house party on a Saturday around 11 o'clock in the morning. And I was to invite everyone to come to this house party. So I wrote a handwritten postcard to every Democrat in Ward 1 of Concord, which is more frequently called Pennacook, and I called them all. And they called me the night before, and they said, would you like to ride to the event, because you worked so hard on it, with Governor Carter? I was like, oh my God. So get a ride to Concord. They give me the ride. He's chatting with me. We get there. 3 people. So, I know he was known for his smile and for his pleasant behavior. He was a pitcher, apparently, in baseball, because he took an apple, bit and winged that apple farther than I could see. I did not say a word on the way back to the afterwards, but the point being is that this is in August of 1975. 3 people showed up. 6 months later, he wins the New Hampshire primary. 6 months later, he's the Democratic nominee, and 6 months later, he's inaugurated as President of the United States. This is a uniquely New Hampshire story, and this is exactly what makes New Hampshire so special. First, that a kid like me could even be involved in that level, and second, that the voters of New Hampshire, while they might not have all shown up that August, they got to know him, and it was very much a retail race. And I look at the people that have been elected president. There's no way that John F. Kennedy would have been the nominee in 1960 without him winning in New Hampshire. And you look at Barack Obama. Without having won Iowa and coming very close to New Hampshire, when he had head down south, he would not have gotten the votes to be the nominee. And you could go, Reagan in 80. New Hampshire was decisive on the Republican side. And so you can go throughout the states that we really provided a leveling platform for candidates to come here, prove themselves, and There have been a long history of people that have come and thought they could buy it. You know, Steve Forbes was one of those that I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars he spent and ended up with nothing on the Republican side. The Democrats have done it as well, where they really walked on thinking that they were going to be the stars. And I always tell them, listen, whatever it is that you did to get elected governor or U.S. Senator or Congress or vice president, whatever you've done, forget about it. Imagine you're running for school board, because we take this seriously, and it's going to be intensely, it's going to be personal. And you better have your facts with you, because if not, there's a long history of people that didn't show up prepared, didn't answer the questions in a way that the New Hampshire voters accepted, and they ended up leaving without much of a vote and bewildered. Why did not the people of New Hampshire fall in love with me? Well, because you shouldn't be president.
We have a few other things I'd like to talk about. I want to stay on this New Hampshire primary a little bit longer, and also invite questions from members of the audience about the primary. If you have a question or thought, including, it doesn't have to be super experts. If you're a student from another part of the country, and it's a beginner question about the primary, we want to hear it. So if you have any thoughts or questions about the primary, just signal, and we'll try to get you in here. Any chance? Or is that no? Yeah. So I have a question. I mean, could it be argued, listening to you, I'm thinking, could it be said that the New Hampshire primary is too influential? I mean, so I hear that this is where this is the one place in the nominating campaign when candidates are subject to retail campaigning, when they're standing and sitting in coffee shops and people's living rooms and taking questions from not focus groups or actors or whatever, but from just ordinary citizens. But does that give New Hampshire too much influence? What would you say if somebody were to say that? The state with the influence is the ones that makes the difference on who the nominee is. We don't pick the nominee or pick the president. What we do is we vet the candidates and we make a recommendation. And we started off, and then as they go through, now the last decade or so, South Carolina, 2 decades, South Carolina has kind of been the one that has decided on the Democratic side who's going to be the nominee. They've been fourth in line, and the person who's won South Carolina has been the eventual nominee in each one of those cycles. And I know that that was a big deal in the George W. Bush race in 2000 as well, his victory over John McCain after John McCain did so well here. South Carolina was the one that brought him to a dead stop. So we don't pick the presidents, and we don't have that influence. What we do is we vet them for you. We say, here's your choices. Here are people that could be president. Here are people that should never be near the White House. So we're allowing candidates, or we're compelling candidates to reveal something about who they really are, not just for the benefit of New Hampshire voters, but for the benefit of the whole country. Chris?
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, we had a Republican leadership summit in Nashville. We had 10 presidential candidates and 30 speakers. Different speakers from around the country, different experts, including people like Tom Holman. We even had Hollywood there. Kevin Sorbo used to play Hercules. And the candidates, we gave them 30 minutes to speak. And one candidate said, "Can I have a teleprompter?" And we said, "No, this is New Hampshire. You don't read a speech. Talk to the people." We said, "You can do whatever you want in those 30 minutes." Most of the candidates took advantage of the opportunity to have Q&A from an unscripted crowd, just regular Republicans. This is a Republican event, so it was geared towards Republican primary voters, clearly. And most of them took Q&A, and they were not scripted. I mean, these were not people in the crowd that they picked. So you get to see a part of the candidate that's not scripted. In other states where it's money, television commercials, teleprompters, you're getting a scripted view of a candidate. But in New Hampshire, you get to see, and it gets exposed for the country, a little bit deeper. What might this person do in the Situation Room in a very difficult case? When you get a really tough question, how are they going to react to it? I was with a lot of the candidates when we went to the Red Arrow Diner in Manchester, kind of a famous place. I don't know, is that in your neighborhood, old neighborhood?
Red Arrow?
The Red Arrow
Diner.
You
Close.
just say Manchester, right?
Yes, Manchester. Yeah.
That's his neighborhood.
So I was there and met Tim Scott, just his first time in the state and first time I met him. And I said, you got to work the counter, go talk to people. Because he was just talking to me and some Republican leaders. I'm like, nah, go talk to people. And he goes, okay, what do I do? And I'm like, go serve him coffee. And he went up, washed his hands, and I'm like, oh, this guy, he kind of knows what he's up against. He washed his hands behind the counter and didn't go in front, behind the counter where the patrons were. He went where the workers were. He said, hey, can I come back here? And he walked down like he was a server, serving and talking to people. And it was amazing how people connected with somebody serving them coffee versus somebody walking behind them, over their shoulder trying to pitch, hey, I want to run for president. I've seen people do that, and a lot of people get dismissed, like, you're bothering me while I'm trying to eat my, tater tots. But he worked that crowd, and I was like, wow, this guy connected with people, and he got some questions, because I was on the outside, with the patrons, kind of walking down along with him, and people asked him the most, revealing questions, about, what would you do if China invaded Taiwan? I mean, really deep questions that you wouldn't think, you might get from somebody at a diner, at 9 in the morning. And people are knowledgeable in New Hampshire. It's kind of I think the First Nation primary is our state sport. We even have high school students that we've run essay contests on the value of the First Nation primary. And the executive council, Democrats, Republicans alike, would invite them in and give them a little award and pat on the back. And so it's inculcated into our whole culture. But we do see a different side of the candidates that you might not see on television. In other states, you can't do this kind of retail. They're just too big. Even Iowa is an enormous state, 100 counties. We've got 10. They call this thing the full Grassley, where you visit all 90, all 100 counties, or 99 or 100. And you visit them all. And people say, oh, I'm getting ready to finish it. I've been working on it for a month. Here, you could do that in kind of 2 days, really. And I think Vivek Ramaswamy kind of almost did it in 1 day. So you can get out there and talk to people. And I've told some friends of mine, look, Alec Baldwin could give a great Republican speech off a teleprompter. But that's not who he is. That would just be a speech off a teleprompter. We really want to see a little bit deeper what these people are all about. And a consultant can write a great speech. They can give you the inflection points. You can practice it. But a president, you have to do some of that. But the most important things you have to do are in difficult situations you've never seen before. How are you going to react? And we do that very well here. Everyone from our high school students all the way up to senior citizen, baby boomers like me and the chairman. Everybody's in on this in this state, and even our out-of-state students. You guys are part of this game too. So we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Listening to you, Chris, and listening to you, Ray, listening to that story about the diner. Your job is to welcome to the Red Arrow Diner. Your job is to introduce yourself to people who probably don't want to be bothered. Welcome to this event. Here are 3 people who've come out to meet you. It underscores for me just how hard it is to be a political candidate. This is really, it's incredibly difficult work. I know they ask for it. I'm not feeling bad for them. But
the reward's pretty good.
If you win,
Government
but there are a lot of
housing for a
losers
couple
out
of
there.
years.
You got a free house. Someone mows the lawn.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could pick out any events, any moments that come to mind from the history of the New Hampshire primary where candidates really fell on their face, where they revealed something and it maybe ended their campaign, or revealed something that they really wished that they hadn't revealed. Any mess-ups that stand out as you think back? Chris?
Yeah, I have one. So I was in the Army before I moved to New Hampshire, and General Wes Clark, I don't know if folks remember him, I used to work for him when he was a colonel, and I was a young captain, and he went on to be a 4-star general, and he was looking at running for president one year. I think it was, I don't know what year it was, but 2000, and he came in the state, and I went to one of his rallies because I was his friend. I wasn't gonna vote for him because I've never voted for a Democrat ever, but So I was at a rally, and he was walking by shaking hands, and I was just there with my son. We're just watching, and he saw me, and he goes, "Chris!" And I'm like, "Oh, no. If my Republican friends see this, it's not going to be good." And Chris, I'm going to need your support. Oh, I can shook hands. Oh, hey, my guys, get in touch with him. And we're talking, and then he went by, and then the people around me said, "Oh, he knows General Clark. He knows General Clark." And I'm like, "Yeah, I used to work for him in the Army." "Oh, are you part of the campaign?" I'm like, No, we can't spread that. Like, I think it was the next day. I believe he was on Close Up, or he's a news interview, and he was asked about a hot button social issue. He was asked about abortion, which was very important in the Democratic primary that year, and he clearly was not prepared to answer it. And he kind of said, "Well, I don't believe this, but this," and he described himself as pro-choice, but then his words were kind of different. And I think that was the end of General Clark's campaign, because he couldn't answer a difficult but expected question. I mean, if you're running for president, you would expect to be prepared to answer that question. A brilliant man, one of the smartest people I've ever known, just brilliant individual, but he just didn't seem prepared to answer that question. And I think that may have been the end of his campaign.
That was it, yeah. Right? I don't mean to pry this out of you.
So many of the stories I can't share. But I do want you to kind of reflect on what happened this last cycle. We had a large number of people running in our primary. And what came out of Iowa was somewhat muddled. Did Bernie win? Did Buttigieg win? What really happened? And there was some serious momentum. You could feel it. That Buttigieg came out of Iowa, maybe not having been crowned the winner, but with some significant momentum. And then they had the New Hampshire debate. And to this day, I haven't quite figured out, because everyone gives me a different answer, did he just assume that New Hampshire was going to follow Iowa and he was going to win New Hampshire? But if you look at that debate, he kind of stood back and let it coast. And I'm watching, I was like, he does not know that, but by acting that way, you're not acting like you want to win. And the New Hampshire people do not like someone who isn't fighting for their vote. And instead, Amy Klobuchar, if you rewatch that debate, she came on with hellfire, and she completely, knocked the wind out of his candidacy, almost defeated him for the second place. And I think within a week, she could have surpassed. She did a phenomenal job because she was in the arena. She was there, involved, and that's what New Hampshire voters respond to. And Pete, just by taking his foot off the gas, just disappeared. And while he came close to Bernie in New Hampshire, he could have won. He ended up not winning, and essentially his candidacy ended.
Yeah, we had just with Marco Rubio in the New Hampshire debate.
Do we remember them?
It was classic Chris Christie. But I was there with Rubio people, and the debate's going, and Chris Christie challenges Marco Rubio, and he answers, and he basically says, all you're doing is memorize talking points. And he gave his little paragraph, and Christie kept hitting him. He repeated word for word the exact same paragraph. And the Rubio people, you could see sweat pouring down. It was like game over, because what Christie essentially accused him of, he demonstrated on national television in front of everyone, and it appeared that he didn't even realize he had done that, because he had prepared so much for it that he had that talking point memorized, and he put it out there 2 times in a row, and it was a very. I felt bad for him and his team. But this is what New Hampshire does, and I mean, this was a national debate. I think it was at St. Anselm's, and the other one, I'll pick on my own side. But Rick Perry was going to eliminate three departments: Department of Energy, the Education Department, and
what other? You felt bad for the guy.
Yeah.
I was just like,
But he was a prohibitive favorite. I think at the time he was the favorite, and that kind of killed him. So, if you're going to put out X number of points, don't say how many. Just say I'm going to put out some points, and if you forget the last one, it's okay. But that hurt him as well, and those are key moments.
When I see that happen, I feel bad for the candidate too. I mean, I really, I guess, I feel how difficult it is, and how there have been people who they're brilliant. They've done extraordinary things in life. They go into politics and they last a week and a half.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, and New Hampshire doesn't make it any easier, that up close focus. And I admire people who give it a go and who try to contribute to their community by stepping up and sharing their thoughts and ideas and going, trying to win an office. Even when I disagree with them, I feel for them. And I admire you, both of you. You're living political lives. You have a vocation in politics. And you wake up every day, I imagine, you're thinking about your candidates and your party and the strategic predicament and the state and the future of the state. And you're thinking about it strategically as partisans. You're also thinking about it as citizens. And you got a lot of people out there probably criticizing you. That's what it is, to be in a position of leadership. And I admire you for being political people and for being willing to take it. And I wanted to invite you to say a little bit, to share, especially with the students here, a little bit about how you came to decide to be political people. How did you decide? There's so many other things to do. A lot of them are easier, a lot of them are more rewarding, less stressful at any rate. How did you decide to take up a life in politics? And Ray Buckley, let's turn to you first.
Well, I was born over in Keene. My parents were both foster kids, had pretty horrible childhoods, both of them. They were teenagers when I came about into the world, and so they were struggling. And when I was 3, my father got a call by a buddy that was a welder, like all of my male relatives, and said, hey, come out to Detroit. There's a project that's going to be a couple of years. You're going to have some work. So we loaded up the car. That's actually my first memory, is getting in the car and riding to Detroit when I was 3. And when we got there, we obviously didn't have much money or anything. So we ended up living in a neighborhood that was, by virtue of everyone in the area struggling, integrated. And so whether it was by going to church, going to school, the neighborhood, the name of my elementary school was Ella Fitzgerald Elementary School. It was truly a diverse. There were a good number of new immigrants. I can remember a young kid was from Germany, and so I was completely blind to the idea that race, color of skin had any relevance to anything other than somebody having blonde hair or somebody having black hair. It just didn't mean anything to me. And so when we came back after that job ended, we were having a really difficult time. It was a really bad part, and we were back in Keene. And I had this amazing teacher that in February of 1967 in 2nd grade, and I remember exactly where in the classroom I was sitting, started talking about Abraham Lincoln, his life, Civil War, and slavery, and I was like, what? The great-grandparents of my friends that I left in Detroit were owned and treated like they were animals and had to live in like barn-like situations. I was just horrified. And so I sat there. I can remember sitting there going, well, I can't free the slaves. I can't, win a war, but I can do something. And if everyone does something to make the world better, then the bad people won't win. So I started volunteering in 1968 when I was 8 years old, made my parents register to vote. My father a Republican, my mother a Democrat, so we got mail from both sides, of course, because I was fascinated by that whole prospect. Then I started volunteering and got to travel with Ed Muskie in 72, and then, of course, the Carter situation in 75. And so it really wasn't a decision. It was a calling that I had that if you're not doing something every day to make the world a better place or a safer place for somebody else, then what are you doing with your life?
I love that story. You're sitting there in the classroom.
Oh,
and
Sandra
it
Whippy
dawns
was her
on
name.
you
Yeah.
that the world isn't going to turn on its own.
No.
You need to get out there and do your part.
Well, it's, my mother's joke is, God knew what he was doing when he put Ray Buckley in New Hampshire, because the politics of New Hampshire is just so extraordinary, whether it's the local elected officials, our legislature, the 2-year terms of the entire state government, the primary, the 400, just on and on. Our ability to really influence as regular citizens is just phenomenal.
Democracy is very close to the ground in New Hampshire. It's not just the New Hampshire primary.
Because we're told that our voice matters. And you go out to other states, people don't even bother to vote. People will move into the state and they weren't brought up with the culture of being involved. And so suddenly they're like, what? Oh, especially now with the general elections New Hampshire being so split down the middle between Democrats and Republicans, we're a battleground and up and down the ballot. So everyone's vote really matters in New Hampshire.
It is like the state makes use of its small scale to bring democracy very close to the people. And I sit in the legislature, 399 other people, and with me. Texas would probably have to have a legislature of 80,000, kind of making that up, to have the same scale as the New Hampshire legislature. So we're really using the scale of the place to bring democracy down to the street.
And the two political parties, the Republicans, New Hampshire Republicans, claim that the Republican Party was born in Exeter. And if you really want to geek out like I do, you find out that the Democratic Party emerged out of Andrew Jackson's presidency. One of the members of his kitchen cabinet was Isaac Hill, who ended up being governor and U.S. Senator from New Hampshire. He was the first political party state chair that was elected by an elected state committee. Previous, it was a group of insiders that would just get together, oh, you're going to be chair. So the whole concept of electing a state committee and having that state committee elect their leadership as a party started right here in New Hampshire in 1832. What also happened in 1832 is the New Hampshire legislature created the Democratic National Convention. So the first national convention of a political party was held in Baltimore in 1832. And it was the New Hampshire legislature, then dominated by Democrats, who created the whole structure of how the convention was going to run, how it was going to function. And the New Hampshire State Party chair gavelled it to order. And that's in the history books about that. We did it again in 1840. So whether it's the primary or it's about, we're also the first state to do same-day voter registration. In 1995, I was in the legislature then. So we have been on the forefront of really empowering. The insiders would rather they in Washington or their friends out in the states decide who the nominees are. And that's what this battle is about, is that you can't control us, neither the Democrats or Republican side. That the voters of New Hampshire will make up the decision no matter what somebody in Washington wants them to do. And we have tripped up candidates historically over and over and over because they just weren't the right person to be president. They do not like that.
Wow. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, I love it. It's that, Chris, life in politics.
Yeah, so I wasn't there, but Amos Tuck founded the Republican Party in Exeter on October 12th, 1853, 170 years ago. And they had to do it in secret. And they founded the party as an anti-slavery party. And just think how far we've come. 170 years ago, they had to found a Republican Party anti-slavery in secret in Exeter. And so the Republican Party's lineage is very, very rich and powerful. When I first registered to vote inside the Beltway, I was born in Washington, D.C. Family goes back to the 1700s in D.C. I registered as a Democrat because my entire family were Democrats, and they were Union Democrats. Democrats were for the working man. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. And then in 1980, Ronald Reagan was running for president. I'm like, boy, I really like this guy. And the hostages, the whole problem with the economics, the misery index, things were not good back in the second half of President Carter's term. And so I said, well, I'm going to register as Democrat. My entire family was very, very upset with me. But I was in the Army. I joined the Army, and Reagan was the guy for me. And I kept an eye on him. I was deployed. I like to say that nobody tangled with us while I was in the Army, but that was really because my entire time in the Army spanned Ronald Reagan's presidency, his 2 terms. And so I fell in love with Ronald Reagan, his policies, his wit. He was funny. He brought the country together. He was not a divisive leader. He brought people together. He worked with Tip O'Neill as Speaker of the House when the Democrats controlled the House. Reagan's entire 8 years, the Democrats controlled the House the entire time. And so he had to work with Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts to get things done. And when I got out of the Army, we came to New Hampshire, 1989. We're in New Hampshire, and I got my tax bill, and I'm like, what the heck is this? Because in the Army, you don't get tax bills for property tax. When you're living on base, you don't get that. And so, oh my goodness. So I ran for budget committee in my town and won, and then I got on the school board. Then I became the town chairman, county chairman, committee man. It's almost like once I got in on this roller coaster, it's like I couldn't get off. It's like, you're on a path. And I got elected to chairman in January, so I think I've caught up to Ray now. 17 years, 9 months. It's about, kind of caught up. He's an admirable adversary. I don't say enemy. We're opponents. I think we all want what's best for the state. And if we can do that, yeah, we're going to throw some elbows. Yeah, we are. We're going to throw some punches. But if we can just stay focused on what the end game is, I want to get Republicans elected because I think we help the state, the people in the state, improve their lives. And I would expect on the other side that they have the same motivation. And so it's my job to kind of articulate those things and help, put those forward, and then let the people decide. Let the people decide who they want to represent them. And I think it's part of that service mentality coming from the Army that I want to do my job, and I want to do a good job at it. And that's my motivation right now. And I love the people of the state, love the state, and anything we can do to make it better, even if the idea comes from a Democrat. I haven't seen it yet, but if it does, I will. If it does, I would jump on board. But in jest, there are a lot of good bipartisan things that can be done. And for our moderator, Russ, here, I know that there are bipartisan things that happen in his committee in election law. And so we can do good things together as well. But that creative tension between the parties, where we can put different ideas out, I think that's healthy for society. And so I'd like to continue to be part of that.
Let's just remember, it was a Democrat who sponsored the legislation that created the First Nation primary.
Yes.
And a Democrat in 1975 that has preserved primary. So it is a bipartisan effort. So there's 2 good ideas.
There you go. Okay.
I just want to just add on to what Chris said about Reagan, because for those of you who weren't either focused on politics back then or weren't yet born, what happened to Chris happened to young people across the country. That Reagan had the ability to connect and inspire an entire generation. And it was phenomenal to see, because previously you thought of young people as being liberals, progressive, but there was this generation that was really motivated to become part of the Republican Party. And if you look at what was happening in New Hampshire was starting to be almost a 2-party state. And then Reagan showed up. And we didn't win a statewide race in New Hampshire from 1982 until Gene Sheen's election as governor in 1996. It completely knocked the wind out of us as a party in New Hampshire because of Reagan's connection to blue-collar workers. So Manchester, Nashville, these previously solid Democratic communities became very supportive of Reagan. The 1984 election was, for those of you who remember that day, there was not any Democrat in New Hampshire left standing that night, and it was just an overwhelming triumph that everyone was elected with. So it was a special time. And point of all of this is that it's not just issues. It's not just politics. it's the character of the person and how they connect with people, and that's critically important. That if you can't connect with people, if you can't communicate with people, if they don't see that empathy, which Reagan absolutely showed, that you just don't have a shot here in New Hampshire and frankly, most places in the country. So,
thank you. I find your stories, very beautiful, very moving, and your commitment to service, both as a soldier and as a political person, and your commitment to making a difference, Ray. I mean, I'm very grateful to you both for that. Let me invite a question from Karen Liathill. Karen? Yeah. And if anyone else has a question, just give me the secret sign, and I'll get to you. Yeah, I now have a few hands in mind. Karen?
Karen Liathill, class of 2000, of the Granite of New Hampshire in my muscles and my brain. Russ, I did the math. It's 9,000. There would have to be 9,000 state reps in Texas.
So I'm only off by a factor of 10. That's better than usual.
Well, you're a gov prof, not a math prof. One of the things that's unique about New Hampshire is the role of undeclared voters. And I think they're about 40% of the voting population, with the Democratic and Republican registered voters pretty similar. Can you talk about the role of undeclared voters in the presidential primary and how you see that moving forward?
Great question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. If you could give it to the gentleman right next to you, Karen. Right here.
I can give the short answer, and then you can expand.
I give you an example that you might not have known about.
Yeah. So undeclareds are 40%, 30% Republican, 30% Democrat. The role of undeclareds in the presidential is critical. In both of our primaries or open primaries, where undeclareds can pick a ballot for either side. And some people in our party wanted to limit that and have only Republicans. I'm not in favor of that because our electorate really represents the people of New Hampshire, not just the sliver of the parties. And so I think it's good that people can pick either ballot. And even though President Biden won't be on the ballot, there's still a motivation for Democrat-leaning voters to take a Democrat ballot because they can write in President Biden or Dean Phillips or someone else. And so they do still have a motivation to take a ballot. Or they could vote for Vermin Supreme, who is actually on the ballot. He may be the most recognizable name there at the moment. But he switches back and forth. He'll be a Republican next time, likely. But it's very important because we do want to represent the totality of the people in the state and have them be able to choose whichever ballot they want. And, of those people in the middle, they're undeclareds. They're not swing voters. A lot of Republicans that are undeclared, they're solid Republicans. They just don't want to register as Republicans for some reason. There's a lot of Democrats like that. The undeclared, really undecided, is a sliver of that, 40%. So we don't want to disenfranchise anyone. And they're important because the candidates now, instead of appealing just to their base only, and in general election, they got to do this gargantuan swing back to the middle. They can campaign as what they would do as president, not just what they do as a partisan political party candidate. So I think it's very important. The undeclared role is extremely important in New Hampshire, and I hope it continues for a long time.
So when Karen mentioned 2000, it triggered this story. Independents were going to play an enormous role in the New Hampshire primary, both the Democratic side and Republican side. Early on, it looked like Al Gore and George W. Bush were going to be the prohibitive favorites in the primary and to receive the nomination. And then along came Bill Bradley from New Jersey on the Democratic side and John McCain on the Republican side. And the polling showed that the independents just couldn't decide between the two of them. They really admired, the Rhodes Scholar Bill Bradley, the New Jersey basketball player and senator, and the Vietnam hero John McCain and senator, and they were just not able. Now, in the Gore campaign, we knew that if they just kind of split down, Bill Bradley was going to win the New Hampshire primary. So part of what we did is encourage people to really admire John McCain a lot. And any way we could, we would talk about, well, you know, John McCain's running, what a hero he is, and in Vietnam, did you see? And because New Hampshire being small enough, we were able to do it enough that if you recall, Al Gore won by, I think, 2 points. And it was that the independents, when you look at the polling afterwards, fell towards John McCain. And so whether or not it was our activities that pushed the independents to supporting John McCain, they made the difference in both the Democratic and Republican primary of 2000.
Interesting. Question?
So as an out-of-state student, I highly admire this idea by New Hampshire residents that you have this ability to act as a sort of filter for candidates. However, clearly national conventions don't necessarily feel the same. If the DNC in the future continues to pass rules packages that limit New Hampshire to be the first primary, at least on the Democratic side, would we see bipartisan support in New Hampshire to at least allow the Democratic primary to move back in order to retain delegates in the future?
I think we both will just say no.
Yeah.
You know, as Jean Sheen said immediately, you know, the DNC didn't give us the primary, they can't take it away. And there's literally nothing that the DNC can do that is going to impact a decision by the party, and vice versa. If the RNC ever wanted to punish the New Hampshire Republicans, there's nothing that they can do that. Our delegates, you know, there's 22 Democratic delegates, I think 16 on the Republican side?
22.
22 again? Okay, so we each have 22 elected delegates. 22 delegates are not going to make a difference.
How many delegates are there at the convention?
About 4,600 on our side, probably about 2,900.
It's over 2,000.
Yeah,
So
it's a little size difference. But we're not going to make the difference, and it's not that important. If the 22 people we sent to Chicago next summer versus being able to make our stand and saying, here's who we believe should be.
You and I had a good time in San Francisco in 1984.
You were underage, Russ.
Right. We'll stop right there.
yeah. Same.
Question in the middle right here. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I remember the 1984 convention as well, although I was working for a Mississippi newspaper at the time. I'm wondering, tonight you've mentioned, I think correctly, the lack of impact of money in the New Hampshire primary. And I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity going forward with a nod to Representative Muirhead, for the primary to become a platform on that issue of money in politics. We've done a very good job of vetting, I think, over the years, but I wonder if there might be some mechanism in which we could make that, frankly, as a case for why New Hampshire deserves to continue to hold that first in the nation status, given, I think, an understanding among the American populace, never mind New Hampshire, that money is clearly distorting the political process.
Well, earlier today, Vivek Ramaswamy and Congressman Ro Khanna from California had a forum together at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, and they specifically talked about the fact that it's not just the candidates' campaigns now, it are these super PACs that are coming in with tens of millions of dollars. And I don't know if any other Republican is talking about that, other it's just Vivek, but he was very articulate about why that's the wrong thing to do, and you know, Roe was agreeing, and then talked about a proposal that's coming forward that our Senator Shaheen put an amendment on to, you know, really close that loop. So I think these are exactly the sort of issues that are tailor-made for New Hampshire because it is small enough that we can have these conversations.
Yeah, when the McCain-Feingold bill was passed, you know, that was an attempt to try to control the influence of money on the campaigns, and, you know, human beings being a devious sort, it's like the loopholes, figuring a way around it, you know, could it have made things worse? And so the devil's in the details between free speech, versus, having too much money in the campaigns, and then loopholes. Because right now, parties can only make so much money. The parties are limited in how much money that we can raise from individuals and organizations, whereas you've got these big PACs that are unlimited. And so it's gone away from the party infrastructures, the money, into these big PACs. So, how can you control people's free speech, ability to get a message out, and still maintain laws that can pass judicial muster? The devil's in the details, but I agree with Chairman Buckley that this is a great place to do it, because we've got people running here who don't have a lot of money, who are getting out talking to a lot of people, and having them make the case. Prominent officials, former governors, senators, making that argument will help us a lot if we give them a fair shake here, which I've seen people in New Hampshire give people a fair shake. And Asa Hutchinson is a great example right now on the Republican side. People in Washington are saying he should get out of the race. And in New Hampshire, we're saying, oh, you want to come and talk to people? We'd love to host you. Come out and get your message out. And so people like him who don't have a ton of money are going to help us advocate for limiting money as well. But I think it's going to be a very difficult thing to get the details on how do you actually do it.
We're rapidly approaching the end here, but I'd like to invite one more question from the front, and the microphone is going to be coming up, so just hang on so that those who are zooming in can hear you.
So this is a question related to where the parties should be able to agree, but by which the party mechanism makes it impossible. It's a question about immigration and giving up on the idea of a grand bargain, just dealing with securing the border. Why can't the two parties, and the American public wants this done so badly, why can't the two parties, at least in New Hampshire, agree to get the border of the United States secured? 6,000 people, Senator Shaheen found, extracted from our officials, came across the northern border between eastern New York State and New Hampshire.
And I know that
we know there's a problem. Why can't the parties deal with this issue?
Yeah, thank you. And I know that you're not policy experts in any particular area, but maybe just looking ahead, do you have hope, or are you feeling more despairing about the potential for bipartisan cooperation?
There have been periods of time where it looked like it was about to happen in '04, and then it got scuttled for political purposes in the presidential race. And because fear is a very powerful tool when you're trying to get votes. And if you can scare the bejesus out of people that something bad is about to happen, and it's really, really scary, then you don't want to solve that problem because you're using that as a tactic. Right now, while you hear a lot of Republicans talk about where's the proposal working its way through Congress, through the House, they have yet to sit down with President Biden in the White House to start actually having a conversation. So far, they have refused to do that in this term. So it takes two people wanting to solve the problem to really solve it. And just one quick other thing before I give it over to my friend. If you take the number, it looks like it's about 100 people per year have come over, because that 6,000 is the entire New York border and the Vermont border. In New Hampshire, if you do it mathematically, it's really more like 100 people. So there's not this big invasion that's coming in trying to destroy New Hampshire.
The possibility, the future of compromise and cooperation.
Yeah. So, back in the Reagan, Tip O'Neill, and even the Newt Gingrich, Bill Clinton time, O'Neill and Reagan, they genuinely liked each other, and they tangled on issues, but they figured things out. They would actually have scotch together in the White House after hours. Gingrich and Clinton, they didn't drink scotch together. I don't think they liked each other, but they still, for the good of the country, figured some things out because they had to. I think it has to be a forcing function. It's not a natural thing, especially in today's polarized world. It's not natural for the parties to want to work together. But on something like the border, I think we've approached what I believe is a crisis time. And I don't want to have to wait until one of those 200 people on the terrorist watch list, the ones that got away, not the ones that we caught, do something. So this is something that, you know, I would have a friendly disagreement with my counterpart that the president has tools in his toolbox that he could solve a lot of this himself. And the Republicans could also be working real proposals. And so you got to look behind it and say, how do they benefit politically? Which is it's a shame for me to even worry. It should be what's best for the country first. And but you know, there are some people who, as Ray said, you know, benefit from an open border. There are some people who are in agribusiness who want the cheap labor that they don't have to pay taxes on or Social Security. And a lot of those may be on the Republican side. There are people who think if we change the demographics of the country, that they'll vote more Democrat and that Texas will be a Democrat forever if we can get enough immigrants over the line and make them citizens. But nowhere in there did I hear what's good for the country, what's the right thing for the country. And that's what I think everybody has to do on very important issues like this. It shouldn't be, how do I get a partisan advantage? It shouldn't be, but unfortunately, it appears that it is. So I think, you know, maybe we should just have New Hampshire take over like running the country, and we could say, hey, what's best for the country? Not play the games, because we're going to be living with the results of poor policy decisions based on partisan gain only. And I just think that's bad. And I think there's some elements we could agree, some we may disagree. But at the end of the day, what's best for the country is ultimately what we should be doing. And please don't get me wrong, we're going to be throwing elbows at each other every so often in the campaigns, and we're going to be fighting against each other to get different people elected. But at the end of the day, if we all, on both parties, you know, at the end of the day say we've got to come together for what's best for the country, then we'll all be better off. And so as I'm trying to beat Democrats at the polls, we'll be recommending to our people to please, once you get elected, act that way so that we can get good things done.
Thank you. I have to say it must have been tempting when the folks at the Rockefeller Center here called you, invited you up to Dartmouth to spend an entire day here hanging out and sharing a stage with each other. It must have been tempting to find some sort of excuse to get out of it. The risk-averse approach would have been to do something else today. And I think it takes a certain amount of courage to get up on a stage with someone you're throwing elbows at and fighting with and arguing with and disagreeing with. And it also takes a commitment to a civic culture, to a community that goes beyond partisan disagreement. A wise distinction from Chris Ager earlier, I hope everybody noticed it, was the difference between enemies and opponents. He said, we are opponents, we're not enemies. And you need an opposition in democracy. There are things to disagree about. It's not easy to get things right. You got to have a debate and an argument and a choice. And that doesn't mean that we're enemies. And to be both opponents and friends, opponents and fellow citizens committed to the common good, I have to say just enacting what you did tonight was an extraordinary lesson for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Ray. Well done.
That was fun.
Yeah, good.